Be me, Kenneth, late 20s, nothing out of the ordinary, working as a systems engineer at a solid mid-tier tech company, not one of the big-name giants, but what we run actually matters, and the paycheck reflects it. Our group sits at the heart of operations. We're the ones keeping the infrastructure alive, so everything else doesn't fall apart. Teams small and close-knit. Mostly men, which is pretty typical for this field. No grand agenda behind it, just the usual mix of applicants and skill sets. There are a few women on the team too, and they pull their weight just like everyone else. Nobody cares about what's in your pants, just what's in your brain. Can you solve the problem or not? That's how it's always been. Our old director was a guy who got promoted upstairs. He was a no-nonsense type, knew his stuff, let us do our work, and only stepped in when we needed executive muscle to get something done. We were a well-oiled machine. Then came the email. Sometime last year, HR announced we were getting a new director. Her name was Kathleen. The email was full of corporate buzzwords: synergy, paradigm shift, forward-thinking leadership. My buddy Henry, who's been at the company since the servers were powered by Steam, just snorted when he read it. Henry is the department's resident cynic. He's seen a dozen management fads come and go. He printed the email and pinned it to his cubicle wall under a sign that just said LOL. The day Kathleen arrived, there was a mandatory meet and greet in the main conference room. She didn't look like our old boss. She was dressed in very sharp, very expensive-looking business attire. She had this intense, unblinking stare. She started her introductory speech, and it wasn't about her past projects or her technical background. It was about her philosophy. Talked a lot about deconstructing outdated workplace hierarchies and challenging the dominant narratives. I just wanted to get back to my desk to fix a memory leak issue. She mentioned that her primary goal was to empower the voices that have been systemically silenced in the tech industry. I looked around the room, I saw my colleagues, guys who just wanted to work, get paid, and go home to their families or hobbies. I saw Ethel, one of our best coders. She's super quiet, an introvert's introvert. She probably hadn't spoken more than 100 words all week, but her code was like poetry. She wasn't silenced. She just preferred to communicate through her work. Then there was Paula. Paula was newer, very ambitious. She was nodding enthusiastically at everything Kathleen said, like she was at a rock concert. Kathleen finished her speech by saying she was excited to bring a new, more equitable culture to our department. Henry leaned over to me and whispered, "We're doomed." The first week was weird. She didn't ask about our ongoing projects. Instead, she scheduled one-on-one meetings with all the female employees first. The guys were left to their own devices, which was fine by us. We had work to do. Then the first big change came. An email with the subject line, "New meeting protocols for a more inclusive dialogue." I still have it saved somewhere. It was a long, rambling memo about how traditional meeting structures favored aggressive, masculine communication styles. Then it laid out the new rule. In all departmental meetings, to ensure a diversity of perspectives are heard, we will begin by inviting our female colleagues to share their thoughts and insights first. Male colleagues are encouraged to listen actively and will be invited to speak after all women have had a chance to contribute, or if they are addressed directly by the meeting facilitator. The facilitator, of course, was always Kathleen. I read it twice. I thought it had to be a joke. I looked over my cubicle wall at Henry. He was just slowly shaking his head, a grim smile on his face. Paula, however, hit reply all within minutes. "Thank you, Kathleen. This is such a progressive and necessary step forward. I'm excited to see the positive changes this brings to our team dynamics." The first meeting under the new regime was a weekly project sync. Normally, these were quick. 15 minutes, tops. We'd go around, each person gives a 1-minute update on their part of the project. Efficient. Kathleen started the meeting. "All right, team, as per our new protocol, I'd like to open the floor to the women. Paula, Ethel, please share your updates and any thoughts you have." An incredibly awkward silence fell over the room. Ethel doesn't like being put on the spot. She just looked down at her notepad and quietly said, "No major updates from my side. The module is on track." Kathleen beamed at her. "Wonderful, Ethel. Thank you for sharing." Then she turned to Paula. Paula, seeing her moment to shine, launched into a 5-minute monologue. It was a masterclass in saying absolutely nothing. She talked about leveraging our core competencies and fostering a collaborative ecosystem. She didn't give a single concrete update on her work. She was just performing for Kathleen. After Paula finished, Kathleen looked around. Any other female voices want to add to that? Ethel shook her head. Kathleen then turned to the 10 or so men in the room. We were all just sitting there. All right, now I'll open the floor to the men. Does anyone have anything critical to add? The way she said critical made it sound like we'd be interrupting her enlightened salon if we spoke. A guy from the network team, a real straight shooter, tried to give his update. Yeah, the new firewall rule set is causing some latency issues on server B7. I'll need to... Kathleen cut him off. Thank you for that. Can you please summarize the issue in an email and we can address it offline? I want to keep this meeting focused on high-level strategy. He just blinked. Okay. The 15-minute meeting dragged on for 45 minutes and accomplished less than nothing. We left the room more confused than when we entered. The latency issue wasn't addressed. This became the new normal. Meetings became excruciating. They were no longer about solving problems. They were about validating Kathleen's worldview. Paula would talk for half the meeting. Ethel would say as little as possible. The men who were the subject matter experts on most of the systems were relegated to the role of silent observers. We tried to adapt. We'd prepared detailed emails before meetings, hoping the information would get through that way. I had an issue with a database cluster that was showing signs of stress. It needed an urgent patch, or it could lead to data corruption. I wrote a 3-paragraph email to Kathleen and the team, outlining the problem, the solution, and the potential consequences of inaction. I sent it a day before the scheduled meeting. The meeting starts. Kathleen opens the floor to the women. Paula talks about the importance of data integrity from a holistic, user-centric perspective. Ethel says she has no updates. Kathleen then says, I saw Kenneth's email about a database issue. Before we get into the technical weeds, I want to explore if there's a more creative, non-traditional solution. Paula, what are your thoughts on blue sky thinking for database management? I couldn't believe it. The solution was right there. It was a standard procedure. Paula then spent 10 minutes talking about how we should reimagine our relationship with data. I tried to raise my hand. Kathleen just gave me a tight little smile. We appreciate your enthusiasm, Kenneth, but let's not get bogged down in a single approach just yet. The meeting ended without a decision. The patch was not approved. I went to Henry's desk afterwards, feeling completely defeated. I don't get it, I said. I'm literally trying to prevent a disaster, and she won't listen. Henry was calmly sipping his tea. He looked at me over the rim of his mug. You're still playing the old game, kid. The game where competence and results matter. He leaned forward. This is a new game now. The rules are different. In this game, feelings are more important than facts. The appearance of equity is more important than a functioning system. So, what do? I asked. We stop playing, he said. Or rather, we play by her rules, exactly as they are written. He explained his idea. It wasn't a rebellion. It was the opposite. It was total, absolute compliance. No more proactive emails. No more trying to warn her. No more raising our hands. We do exactly what the protocol says. We listen actively. We speak only when invited. We provide only the information that is directly asked for, and nothing more. And most importantly, we document everything. Every ignored warning. Every nonsensical decision. Every meeting that goes nowhere. We create a paper trail. It felt wrong. It felt like letting the team fail. But what other choice did we have? We were being actively prevented from doing our jobs. The guys on the team had a quiet meeting in the break room later that day. Everyone was frustrated. Stories like mine were piling up. A critical server upgrade was delayed because the discussion got sidetracked by Paula wanting to form a committee to explore the emotional impact of system downtime on our user base. A security vulnerability wasn't patched because Kathleen felt the male engineer who found it was being alarmist. We all agreed. Malicious compliance was the only way forward. The next meeting was a different experience. Kathleen started, as usual, by opening the floor to the women. Paula gave her usual spiel. Ethel gave her usual one-sentence update. Then Kathleen turned to the men. All right, anything to add? Complete silence. 10 guys, all experts in their fields, just staring back at her. Not angrily, just blankly. She looked confused. No one? Nothing on the network side? The storage array? A few guys just shook their heads. It was the quietest, fastest meeting we'd had in weeks. We were out in 10 minutes. Kathleen looked strangely disappointed. I think she enjoyed the feeling of shutting us down. When we shut ourselves down, it took the fun out of it for her. This pattern continued. Productivity in the department plummeted. Tasks that used to take a day were now taking a week, tangled in a web of inefficient communication. Kathleen didn't seem to notice or care. Her reports to upper management were filled with glowing reviews of the new collaborative culture she was building. She was measuring the wrong things. She wasn't measuring completed projects or system uptime. She was measuring how much Paula talked in meetings. A few of us started keeping personal logs. I had a spreadsheet. Date of meeting, topic. My proposed solution, sent via email for the record. The outcome of the meeting, usually no decision or decision to form a subcommittee. It was getting long. The atmosphere in the office soured. There was a clear divide. It was Kathleen and Paula on one side, and pretty much everyone else on the other. Ethel was caught in the middle. You could see she was uncomfortable. She was an engineer. She just wanted to build things and solve problems. This corporate theater was a waste of her time. She started working from home more often, just to avoid the meetings. The men on the team grew closer. We'd go to lunch together, venting our frustrations in low voices. It wasn't about hating Kathleen. It was about the sheer stupidity of the situation. We were highly paid professionals being treated like children in a timeout. We felt disrespected. Our experience, our knowledge, was being actively discarded because of our gender. It was the ultimate irony. In her quest to fight perceived prejudice, she was creating a system of actual, tangible prejudice. Then came the project that would change everything. We called it Project Titan. It was a massive undertaking, a complete overhaul of our primary client-facing platform. It was a high-stakes, high-visibility project with a very tight deadline, the kind of project where you need your A-team firing on all cylinders. The initial planning phase was a disaster. The kickoff meeting lasted 3 hours. The first 2 hours were Kathleen and Paula discussing the vision and philosophy of Project Titan. They talked about how the platform needed to be not just functional, but empathetic and socially conscious. They designed a logo for the project before we had even decided on the core architecture. Henry, who had overseen 3 similar platform migrations in his career, sat through the whole thing with a look of profound pain on his face. He was the most senior engineer on the team. His input was crucial. At the end of the meeting, Kathleen finally turned to the technical staff. Okay, we've established the why. Now, let's briefly touch on the how. Any initial thoughts from the men? Henry raised a finger. He didn't wait to be called on. He knew this was too important. The proposed timeline is impossible, he said, his voice flat. The core assumption in this plan about data migration is fundamentally flawed. If we follow this roadmap, we won't just miss the deadline. We'll risk catastrophic data loss for our biggest clients. The air in the room went cold. It was the bluntest, most direct challenge to Kathleen's authority since she'd arrived. Kathleen's smile became a thin, hard line. Henry, I appreciate your traditional perspective, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. But we're trying to foster a can-do attitude here, not a can't-do one. Perhaps we need to think more innovatively instead of immediately pointing out problems. She turned to Paula. Paula, what's your take on this? How can we overcome these perceived obstacles? Paula, who probably couldn't tell a database from a donut, immediately jumped in. I agree, Kathleen. I think we need to challenge the old ways of thinking. Maybe Henry's concerns are based on outdated methodologies. We're in a new era of agile and flexible development. Henry just looked at her. He didn't even bother to argue. He just slowly closed his notebook, a gesture of complete surrender. He knew. We all knew. Kathleen was going to steer this ship directly into an iceberg, and she was convinced the iceberg was the one at fault. That night, Henry sent an email. It was addressed to Kathleen, and he CC'd the entire department. It was a masterpiece of professional CYA, cover-your-ass communication. Subject: concerns regarding the Project Titan migration strategy. In precise technical language, he laid out exactly why the current plan was a recipe for disaster. He detailed the specific technical hurdles, the flawed assumptions, and the likely points of failure. He proposed an alternative strategy, one that was more complex up front, but infinitely safer. He ended the email with, I am formally documenting these concerns to ensure all stakeholders are aware of the potential risks involved with the current project plan. It was a direct challenge, but wrapped in so much corporate jargon that she couldn't discipline him for it. He had done his duty. The warning was on the record. The next day there was a project meeting. Kathleen didn't even mention Henry's email. She acted like it didn't exist. Instead, she announced that she was restructuring the project team to maximize synergy. She made Paula the project communications lead. She put Henry in charge of legacy systems documentation, effectively sidelining the most experienced person on the team. Me and the other senior guys were assigned to minor subtasks. The core architectural decisions were being made by Kathleen and a junior developer who just agreed with everything she said. Project Titan was no longer an engineering project. It was a vanity project, a monument to Kathleen's ideology. And we were all just forced to stand by and watch the slow-motion train wreck unfold. We did our assigned tasks, we followed the rules, we spoke when spoken to, and we documented. Every single time we saw a problem, we sent a polite professional email. Dear Kathleen, as per your directive, I am working on Task X. I have identified a potential dependency issue with System Y. Please advise on how to proceed. The response was always the same. Either no response at all, or a dismissive reply from Paula about staying focused on our assigned verticals. The project was falling behind schedule within the first week, but in the meetings, Kathleen and Paula would present beautiful PowerPoint slides with green check marks and uplifting quotes. They were managing the perception of the project, not the reality of it. It was surreal. It felt like living in two different worlds, the world of our logs and emails, which showed a project in critical condition, and the world of Kathleen's meetings, where everything was sunshine and progress. We all knew a day of reckoning was coming. We just didn't know how spectacular it would be. The first real cracks in the facade of Project Titan started to show about a month in. We were supposed to hit a major milestone, the first successful data migration in the development environment. It was the critical step Henry had warned about. The team Kathleen had put in charge, a couple of junior guys led by her sycophant, ran the script. It failed. Not just failed, but failed spectacularly. It didn't just fail to copy the data. It corrupted the source database in the dev environment. A complete mess. Panic ensued. An emergency meeting was called. This time, Kathleen couldn't ignore the technical details. She looked flustered for the first time since she'd arrived. What happened? She demanded, looking at the junior dev who was pale as a ghost. He stammered something about an unexpected schema mismatch. Henry, who had been sitting silently in the corner, coughed softly. All eyes turned to him. Kathleen looked annoyed. Yes, Henry? Do you have something to add? It wasn't an unexpected mismatch, Henry said calmly. It was the exact mismatch I detailed in my email from 4 weeks ago. Point 3, subsection B. You could have heard a pin drop. Paula jumped in to defend Kathleen. We can't get bogged down in finger-pointing. We need a solution-oriented mindset. Henry just looked at her. The solution was also in that email, but we're past that now. The original dev database is fried. You'll have to restore from a backup, which will take at least a day, and then you'll have to rewrite the migration script from scratch, which will take a week if you know what you're doing. The milestone is missed. He delivered the lines without a hint of, I told you so. It was just a cold, factual statement. It was more damning than any angry outburst could have been. Kathleen's response was telling. She didn't acknowledge Henry was right. She just declared, this is a learning opportunity for the team, a chance to show our resilience. Let's circle back tomorrow with a renewed sense of purpose. The meeting was over. Nothing was solved, but something had shifted. The men in the room were no longer just frustrated. There was a quiet confidence growing. Our malicious compliance was creating a fortress of evidence. Every failure of the project was a direct result of Kathleen ignoring documented expert advice. We were just following orders. The project limped along. They restored the database. They tried to rewrite the script, but without Henry's direct involvement, it was slow and clumsy. They were weeks behind schedule, but Kathleen's reports to her superiors were masterpieces of creative writing. She'd use phrases like recalibrating timelines to optimize for quality instead of we're massively behind schedule. She blamed legacy system complexities instead of we ignored the guy who understands the legacy systems. Around this time, the client started getting nervous. Project Titan was a big deal for them, too. They had their own timelines and marketing campaigns built around our launch date. They started asking for more detailed technical reports. Kathleen, of course, assigned Paula to be the liaison with the client. Paula would have these long, cheerful phone calls with the client's project manager, assuring them that everything was synergizing beautifully. But the client's tech lead wasn't an idiot. He started reaching out to some of us directly, on the sly. I got a message from him on our corporate chat. "Hey Kenneth, just wanted to check in on the database performance metrics for Titan. Paula's reports are a little vague." I was in a tough spot. I couldn't throw my director under the bus directly, but I also couldn't lie, so I just sent him the raw data, the performance logs, the error rates, the unresolved ticket queue. I didn't add any commentary, just the facts. A few minutes later, he replied, "I see, thank you, that's very illuminating." I knew what he meant. The data told a story of a project in deep, deep trouble. This started happening more and more. The client's technical team was bypassing the official channels and coming straight to us, the engineers on the ground. We all adopted the same strategy. Provide the raw, unvarnished truth. No opinions, just data. It was a quiet, underground rebellion of facts. Kathleen must have gotten wind of it because she sent out another memo. To ensure clarity and consistency in our communications, all contact with the client must now be funneled through our project communications lead, Paula. It was a transparent attempt to regain control of the narrative, but it was too late. The client knew they were being lied to. The pressure was mounting. Kathleen started to get more desperate and more authoritarian. The meetings became even more unbearable. She would spend the entire time trying to extract a public commitment from us that we were still on track. "Kenneth, can you confirm for the group that the database tasks are on schedule for a Q3 delivery?" I would just reply with the facts. "The initial setup is complete. However, the data import task is currently blocked pending the resolution of the migration script, which is being handled by another team." It was a non-answer, and it drove her crazy. She accused us of a lack of team spirit and not being solution-focused. One time, she got visibly angry in a meeting. "I feel like I'm not getting the buy-in I need from the men in this room," she said, her voice sharp. "It's this passive resistance. It feels like you're all waiting for this project to fail." Henry, without looking up from his laptop, muttered just loud enough for everyone to hear. "We're not waiting, we're documenting." Paula shot him a venomous glare. Kathleen looked like she was about to explode, but she couldn't do anything. We weren't being insubordinate. We were being meticulously professional. The atmosphere in the department was toxic, but not in the way Kathleen thought. It was a quiet, cold war. Kathleen and Paula on one side, with their PowerPoints and buzzwords. The rest of us on the other, with our log files, email chains, and server metrics. Even Ethel, the quiet coder, was starting to show signs of cracking. Kathleen had tasked her with building a UI component based on a design that was technically impossible. Ethel had tried to explain the limitations in a meeting. Kathleen had cut her off. "Ethel, I need you to have a more positive mindset. We're not here to talk about what's impossible. We're here to make the impossible possible." It was like a line from a bad motivational poster. Ethel, being non-confrontational, just went back to her desk and tried to make it work. I saw her a few days later, looking exhausted. "How's the UI component going?" I asked. She just shook her head. "It's a mess. I've spent 40 hours trying to work around a fundamental flaw in the design. I could have built a perfectly functional, good-looking alternative in a day if she had just listened." "Did you put that in an email?" I asked. She gave me a small, tired smile. "Of course I did." We were all building our cases. The breaking point came from outside. The client, now completely fed up with Paula's happy talk and Kathleen's stonewalling, escalated the issue. They went straight to our vice president. The VP was a very serious, very busy man. He was an old-school executive, the kind of guy who only cared about three things: profit, loss, and deadlines. He didn't care about corporate culture unless it was impacting the bottom line, and Project Titan was about to blow a massive hole in the bottom line. The VP called an emergency meeting, a Project Titan review. It was to be held in the big boardroom on the executive floor. Kathleen, of course, was to present the status of the project. The entire department was required to attend. The day before the big meeting, Kathleen held a pre-meeting with us. It was a strategy session, or rather, a session where she was going to tell us what the strategy was. "Tomorrow's meeting is crucial," she began. "It's vital that we present a unified front to the executive leadership." She looked around the room, making eye contact with each of the men. "There has been some negativity and resistance within this team. That ends now. When the VP asks questions, I will be the one to answer them. I need you all to back me up. We need to project confidence. Are we clear?" It was a direct order to lie. She was telling us to sit there and nod along while she misled the VP. Then she made her fatal mistake. She turned her attention to the men again. "I know this project has been challenging, and frankly, I am very disappointed in the lack of support I've received from the male members of this team. Your refusal to engage, your passive-aggressive silence. It feels like a coordinated effort to undermine my leadership. And it's a classic example of the toxic masculinity that holds so many companies back." She paused for effect. "So, at the meeting tomorrow, I'll be addressing this. I'll have to inform the VP that the project delays are, in large part, due to this team's resistance to a new, more inclusive style of leadership." She was going to blame us. She was going to stand in front of the VP and throw every single one of us under the bus. After all her talk of safe spaces and empowerment, her solution was to publicly shame and professionally ruin her own team to save her own skin. I looked at Henry. He was staring at Kathleen, but his face was completely unreadable. A perfect poker face. But I knew what he was thinking. I knew what we were all thinking. The gloves were off. After the meeting, a small group of us gathered at Henry's desk. Me, a couple of the other senior guys. There was no panic, no anger, just a calm, grim resolve. "So," Henry said, leaning back in his chair, "she's going to try to burn us all to the ground." "What's the play?" I asked. Henry smiled, a real, genuine smile for the first time in months. "There is no play," he said. "We don't have to do anything. We just have to show our work." He tapped a thick folder on his desk. "I've been compiling everything, every email, every meeting agenda, every ignored warning." He looked at me. "You have your logs, right?" I nodded. "Every single meeting." "Good," he said. "Get a good night's sleep. Tomorrow is going to be a very interesting day." I went home that night and spent an hour organizing my files. I put everything in chronological order: the email announcing the new meeting rules, my early warnings about the database, the logs of every derailed meeting, Henry's big warning about Project Titan, the client's increasingly frantic messages, Kathleen's memo about channeling all communication through Paula. It was a mountain of evidence. It told a clear, undeniable story. A story of incompetence, ideology, and hubris. And we hadn't had to be insubordinate or rude. We had just done our jobs, followed the rules she set, and kept the receipts. I felt a strange sense of calm. For months, we had been in a situation that felt insane and unjust. We had been silenced, dismissed, and were now about to be blamed for a failure we had tried to prevent. It was the ultimate feeling dismissed trigger for our whole team. But we had the truth on our side, and we had it all in writing. The next morning, we all walked into the executive boardroom. The air was thick with tension. The VP was sitting at the head of a massive mahogany table. He looked even more intimidating in person. He had a reputation for not suffering fools gladly. Kathleen was setting up her laptop, a confident, practiced smile on her face. Paula was next to her, looking nervous but eager. The rest of us filed in and took our seats. We sat together, a silent, united block. Kathleen was about to give the performance of her life, and we were about to give her a standing ovation of facts. The VP started the meeting without any pleasantries. "Kathleen, I've read the executive summary. It's not good. Project Titan is over budget and behind schedule. My clients are calling me directly. Explain yourself." His voice was flat, like a dead channel. Kathleen launched into her presentation. It was a masterwork of corporate spin. She had charts with carefully selected data points, upward trending graphs that conveniently omitted the disastrous first month. She spoke eloquently about overcoming unforeseen challenges and pivoting our strategic implementation. Then she got to the part we were all waiting for. "While we have faced some technical hurdles," she said, gesturing vaguely at the screen, "the most significant obstacle has been a cultural one." She paused, letting the statement hang in the air. I was brought in to modernize this department's culture, to move away from an outdated top-down command structure to a more collaborative and inclusive model. Unfortunately, there has been significant resistance to this change from some of the more tenured members of the team. She didn't name names, but she kept glancing over at Henry and the other senior men. This resistance has manifested as a lack of engagement, a refusal to proactively contribute in meetings, and what I can only describe as a campaign of passive-aggressive non-cooperation. This has, regrettably, impacted the project's velocity. She was doing it. She was actually blaming us for following her own rules. The VP listened, his face an unreadable mask. When she finished, he didn't even look at her presentation. He turned his gaze to our side of the table. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Are you sabotaging this project?" The whole room was silent. Kathleen had a smug, triumphant look on her face. She thought she had us cornered. This was the moment. Kenneth, me, I took a deep breath. I hadn't planned to be the spokesperson, but Henry gave me a subtle nod. It was my turn. "Sir, that is not an accurate representation of the situation," I said, my voice steady. "We haven't been uncooperative. We have been following our director's explicit written policies." The VP raised an eyebrow. "What policies?" "With your permission, I'd like to show you," I said. I connected my laptop to the projector. Kathleen's face flickered from a confident smile to a look of sheer panic. The first thing I brought up on the giant screen was her email, the new meeting protocols. I highlighted the key sentence: "Male colleagues will be invited to speak after all women have had a chance to contribute." This policy was implemented shortly after Kathleen's arrival, I explained. As instructed, we listened. We waited to be called upon. We did not speak out of turn. Then I moved to the next exhibit. Henry's email, the one from the beginning of Project Titan. I put it up on the screen, the paragraphs detailing the exact reasons the migration would fail. This is a warning sent by Henry, our most senior engineer, on the second day of the project. He predicted the exact failure that occurred last month. The warning was ignored. Kathleen tried to interrupt. "This is out of context. I encourage a diversity of opinions." The VP held up a hand, silencing her without looking at her. His eyes were glued to the screen. I kept going. I brought up my own logs, my own unanswered emails about the database risks. I showed the client's frantic messages to me, and my data-driven, factual replies. I brought up Kathleen's memo, explicitly forbidding us from communicating with the client. It was a calm, methodical presentation of facts. I didn't use emotional language. I just said, "On this date, this was sent. On this date, this happened. Here is the policy we were instructed to follow." The narrative was undeniable. We weren't saboteurs. We were employees who had our expertise rejected and our voices silenced by a manager who valued ideology over reality. We tried to warn her, and when that failed, we followed her rules to the letter and documented the inevitable consequences. When I was done, I just sat down. The silence in the boardroom was deafening. The VP slowly turned his head and looked at Kathleen. Her face was ashen. Paula looked like she was about to be physically ill. But the VP wasn't done. He was thorough. He turned to the one person who hadn't spoken, the one person he knew was a pure engineer with no interest in office politics. "Ethel," he said. Her name seemed to echo in the quiet room. "You're one of our top developers. I value your opinion. Tell me what's been going on." Ethel looked startled. She hated being the center of attention. She took a moment, gathering her thoughts. She looked at Kathleen, then at the VP. "What Kenneth presented is accurate," she said, her voice soft but clear. "We've been unable to work effectively. Good technical advice has been consistently ignored. I personally wasted almost a week on a task that was flawed from the beginning because my feedback wasn't accepted. The project is failing because of how it's being managed, not because of the team. It was the final nail in the coffin. The empowered female voice that Kathleen claimed to be championing had just completely repudiated her. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife." The VP stared at Kathleen for a long, painful moment. He then turned to Paula. "Paula," he said, "what is the current read/write latency on the Titan project's primary data store?" It was a basic, fundamental technical question about the project she was supposedly the communications lead for. Paula's eyes went wide. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She just stammered. The synergy. We're leveraging. The VP cut her off with a wave of his hand. He had his answer. He stood up. The meeting was over. Kathleen, my office. Now, he said. Henry, you're the acting director of this department, effective immediately. Your first priority is to create a realistic recovery plan for Project Titan and have it on my desk by Monday. Kenneth, you'll be his lead on this. I want a full, honest assessment. No more PowerPoints, just the truth. He walked out of the room. Kathleen, looking utterly defeated, gathered her things and followed him like a ghost. We never saw her again. We heard later she was separated from the company that same afternoon. They let her clear out her desk after hours. The aftermath was swift. The very first thing Henry did as acting director was send a one-line email to the department. Subject, new meeting protocols. Effective immediately, this policy is rescinded. The cheer that went up in our part of the office was quiet, but deeply felt. Paula came to work the next day, but she was a pariah. Nobody would talk to her. She'd lost all credibility. She put in her 2 weeks' notice by the end of the week. Our first meeting under Henry's leadership was beautiful in its simplicity. He stood at the whiteboard. All right, Project Titan is a dumpster fire, he said. Here's the situation. Here's what needs to be fixed. Who has ideas? Hands shot up. The room was buzzing with energy. Problems that had been festering for months were solved in minutes. We were finally allowed to do our jobs again. We worked hard, pulling long hours, but it was good work. The morale of the team skyrocketed. We were a team again. We ended up salvaging the project. We had to push the deadline back, but we communicated honestly with the client, and they were just relieved to be getting straight answers. Henry was officially made the permanent director a few months later. Sometimes when we're having a beer after work, we talk about the Kathleen era. It feels like a bad dream, a case study in how a single person with a bad ideology can destroy a perfectly functional team. She came in talking about empowering women, but she alienated Ethel, the most competent woman on the team. She came in talking about fighting toxic masculinity, but she created a toxic environment of distrust and division. She tried to silence us, but in the end, the only thing that got silenced was her own career at the company. The lesson we all learned was simple. In the real world, results matter. Competence matters. And if you try to build a world based on anything other than that, it's eventually going to come crashing down. And it's always a good idea to keep the receipts.